So it's great to catch up with you, really because I just don't know anyone who is doing the breadth and depth of work, especially with younger voters of color like you are. And so before we go forward, I do want to just go back for a couple minutes and talk about 2024 and your assessment of what happened in that election, and specifically the movement among younger voters of color and specifically younger men.
Yeah. Look, I mean, we were honored to serve as a pollster for the Harris campaign in 2024, specifically focused on Black voters and young voters. And because of the efforts of the campaign, we were able to close pretty significant gaps. The underperformance that we saw when Joe Biden was at the top of the ticket, um, the Harris campaign was able to close, almost a 20-point gap with Black voters, a 14-point gap with young voters. But there just was not enough time to reverse trends that had existed far before this campaign started.
Mm.
Trends that existed far before Joe Biden was president. We've been seeing underperformance, erosion amongst base voters. And so in the 2024 cycle, we saw Democrats do worse, get less votes from every single group that we would consider our base. We got less votes from Black voters, from young voters, from voters of color, from urban voters, from working class voters, anyone that you would consider a Democratic base voters, Democrats did worse with that group. And so I
Right.
think that reflects, there's a lot of work to do, not just in this opposition period, but in the rebuild going into the midterm.
Right. To your point, this wasn't just one group of voters that didn't show up or that was dispirited. In fact, I think the only group, Terrence, that improved their margin with Democrats were white college voters, maybe white college women specifically, but certainly that was about it, in terms of improving the vote from Biden. So let's dig into that. This idea that this defection, if you will, from Democrats started long before the 2024 campaign. You've done a lot of work, a lot of research with these voters, really going back. I'm as we just discussed, you before this recording, you've been in business since 2018, but you've been in the field for longer than that. So what's going on here? What's been happening with these voters, and what are Democrats doing wrong, or what are Republicans doing right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, we've been digging pretty deep into this, and there's a couple of things happening here. One is the number one reason why Republicans are doing better with men of color, who I believe are emerging as the new swing voters, is because they're spending money trying. Right? There's an effort, there's an investment going after young men of color, namely these like more cynical, disengaged voters. We call them rightfully cynical because they're lowest education, lowest per capita income. They are closest to the pain, right? And Republicans are seizing on that pain. One, by telling them that the Democrats have failed them. Two, by telling them that their problems are because of all these other people, because of immigrants, because of trans people. But three, and this is where I do think that there's some room for Democrats to improve here. They're appealing to them on cultural issues. They're appealing to their values, to values of masculinity, where we say, it's not all toxic. There's a role for masculinity on the left too. We need to define what that role is. But also, values like spirituality, self-reliance, and generating generational wealth. That their attempts to appeal there are reaping benefits. There's ROI, return on investment, and so that's a part where we got to dig in and start to reassemble this coalition.
So for Democrats who say, "Oh, look, this is just a Trump thing," he has this appeal as the business guy, the outsider. Uh, your assessment is it goes beyond just Trump. Like
It's beyond
Republicans
Trump.
after Trump are still going to have these same messages and appeals.
That's right. It's because it's not just after Trump. Republicans during Trump, right? We see
Mm.
Republicans down ballot doing twice as well with men of color. Tom Tillis got twice as many black men's votes as he previously got. David McCormick in Pennsylvania got twice as many black men's votes as the previous Republican candidate for Senate. And so it's not unique to Trump. I do think it
Hmm.
started with Trump. It started there because Trump was the first one to begin making those investments. But Republicans, like we've seen the Republican Party do on every issue, they are following Trump's lead. And in Trump's Republican Party, they are making a coordinated effort to go after young men, and there's a return on that investment.
Yeah. And how much of the movement is also that not only have Democrats maybe not invested in the same way, but the assumptions that Democrats made about this being, as you said, these are our base voters. So on the issues, they'll never leave us because we're clearly superior, or that we can sort of guilt these younger men into continuing to vote for Democrats. Um, I'm curious your take on that, as well as, during the campaign, President Obama basically admonishing young men, saying, y'all have to get over your hesitancy to vote for women.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you made of that?
Yeah, well, one thing about Barack Obama is when he speaks, they hear it, right? He breaks
Hmm.
through the noise. Whether they like
Hmm.
it or not, they hear it. They all heard that. And for some black men, it was motivating, right? They wanted to prove him wrong. But, I'm glad you brought up that example because in 2008, let me say this. In every focus group that I conducted, there was at least one person that was willing to admit that they had concerns about voting for her because she was a woman. And what I recognize, but oftentimes these were the same men of color that would express uh, that women shouldn't have to go through this type of rigorous politics, that women should be protected and cherished from these types of things. There was what I started to recognize was that just because men of color believe that men should be head of household, and many women of color agree with that. In fact, almost a majority of black women agree with that. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're racist. I'm sorry, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're sexist,
Hmm.
and that there was a requirement here to have a conversation with men, the same way Barack Obama did in 2008 when he recognized that racism had the potential to undermine his candidacy. He didn't whack his finger at white people and shame them for being racist. He got on TV and said, even my grandmother, who I love the most, holds unconscious bias, and this is an opportunity for America to rise above that, to not be
Right.
black states and white states, and America, attempted to rise above that. Well, we needed to do the same thing with men in this election, to explain how the role of gender is evolving, how society is evolving, and how that means that their role is evolving in it, and how in fact we might need them now more than ever, as we attempt to elect the first woman president. And I just don't think that we engaged men in those conversations, and so you start to see 33% of men of color saying that men are losing their position in society, and that we have to lean into that and not shame them for feeling that way, but give them an exit ramp and give them
Right.
a role in this new evolving society.
You've also talked about the generational gap as being maybe even more profound than the gender gap. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the same way we've seen 2 or 3% more black men supporting Republicans over time. In fact, I'll give you some of the numbers here. In 20, here it is. So in 2012, the last time Barack Obama was on the ballot, 87% of black men supported Barack Obama. In 2016, when Hillary Clinton was on the ballot, 82% of black men supported Hillary Clinton. So it's not just sexism. Well, in this election, only 77% of black men
Right.
supported Kamala
Oh,
Harris. Pretty
right.
considerable drop. Well, the same thing is happening amongst younger voters, right? Um, for Latino men under the age of 50, there was a 20-point drop in support for Joe Biden in 2020, um, compared to Kamala Harris in 2024. A 20-point drop. These are not marginal changes. These are not within the margins. These are determining the outcome of the election. The reason I think it is more profound amongst young people is because millennials and Gen Z have now emerged as the largest voting bloc in America.
Right.
They are the electorate. I keep saying young people don't have next, they have now. This is their time. They're also the most diverse voting bloc in America. And they do lead with their identities in politics. Young people don't want to have a post identity politics. This is where Democrats' response to what happened in 2024 seems a little bit off to me. That they want to avoid the culture issues, avoid the identity issues. Well, in fact, we need to lean into it and define it, redefine it in our way. What
So
is
what does that look like, Terrance?
um I think it is, when Republicans put forth a vision of society that is, rigid gender definitions and traditional family roles and limited immigration, um, I think that Democrats' response can't simply be no. It can't simply be we don't want that. It has to be a presentation of a multiracial society as we would see it. What is the role of
Mhm.
immigration in that society? What are the role of genders in that society? What is the role of men and women, of sexuality? Um, because unless we do that, unless we present an alternative, we're just asking them to vote against something.
Right.
And I don't know, and I work for the Democratic Party. I don't know what our vision is on some of these things. I know what our policies are. I know what we want to vote, what we want a majority of votes to do, but what is the society that we're trying to achieve? Because I know exactly what Society MAGA is trying to achieve.
And how do you come to an answer on that, Terrance, as a party? And especially when you're the minority party in Congress, there's not a presidential election until 2028. What should Democrats be doing to get to that place, that policy, that vision?
Yeah, and this is not a self plug for hit strategies to do more research, but we need more research. I don't claim to have the answer to that. I have some examples of it from the past. I think Barack Obama reimagined
Right.
society to not be red states and blue states, to not be black and white. He reimagined a unified society where we have more in common than we do that separates us. I think Bernie Sanders has attempted to reimagine society, where you shouldn't have to pay for some of these things that are in fact rights to you. That we should not live in a society where the wealth gap is as big as it is, where where the top 1% of the top 1%, to use the Bernie line. There's something seriously wrong in this country when the top 1% of the top 1%. Well, I think that one, we need research. Two, we need a visionary leader to present that vision, and
Right.
something that this very diverse coalition can unite behind.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I'm curious on your take on this. Look, until Barack Obama came onto the scene, the Democratic coalition in 2004 actually looks a lot like the Democratic coalition of 2020 and in some ways in 2024, right? I feel like so many folks in both parties, but certainly on the Democratic side, if you came up in the era of Obama, the assumption was this is the way things have always been, that Democrats always win young voters by these huge margins, always are going to win Black voters by 87, 88 points, as opposed to he was a unique figure that was able to coalesce these voters in a way that no one else has been able to do yet. So, is the goal then to try to reimagine the coalition? Or is it to say we've got to get back those people that we lost to Democrats? I mean, I'm
That's,
sorry, to Republicans.
yeah, that's a great question, Amy. Because of the transformative figure that Barack Obama was, that you just described, and his ability um, to consolidate so much of this young and minority vote, matching that with an equally but opposite transformative figure in Donald Trump, who has
That's right.
proven the ability to mobilize white rural voters in ways that we couldn't imagine. Look, um, as we pour through this data, as voter files are getting updated, I'm beginning to realize that Kamala Harris, in fact, got more votes than Joe Biden got in 4 of the 7 swing states that she lost. She got
Mm,
more votes than Joe Biden got when he won in Michigan, Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina, but lost all of those states. And what that tells me is that she's not just we're not just losing our voters. He's mobilizing new voters.
right.
And those two transformative figures, Barack Obama and Donald Trump, the impact that they've had on our electorate, I don't think anyone can predict whether or not this is a realignment, whether we revert to some type of norm. I
Right.
can't predict that yet, but the patterns have been quite volatile, and they are beginning to impact the voters that I focus on the most, young people and people of color, in ways that are still shocking to me.